The heavy rain drummed against the windshield as Marcus Williams drove his old black sedan through the iron gates of the Blackstone estate. He had seen many wealthy homes during his 10 years as a security guard, but nothing quite like this. The mansion stood like a castle from a fairy tale, with its tall windows glowing warmly in the gray morning light. Stone lions guarded the entrance, and perfectly trimmed gardens stretched as far as he could see despite the stormy weather. Marcus parked his car near the servants' entrance as instructed and grabbed his single duffel bag from the back seat. Mr. Richard Blackstone had called him personally 3 days ago. The conversation had been brief, but the desperation in the man's voice was clear. His 25-year-old daughter, Elena, was completely out of control. She threw wild parties that ended with police visits. She crashed expensive cars like they were toys. She dated dangerous men who only wanted her father's money. She had been arrested twice for public disturbances, and once for being drunk in public. The local newspapers loved writing stories about her latest scandals, and each headline made the family look worse. Marcus had handled difficult clients before, but something about this job felt different. Mr. Blackstone had offered him triple his usual rate plus room and board at the estate. The catch was simple. He needed to stay close to Elena at all times. No exceptions. No days off. No excuses. The previous 5 security guards had all quit within a month. Some left because Elena made their lives miserable. Others quit because they simply could not handle her wild behavior and constant rule-breaking. As Marcus walked toward the main house, his boots splashed through puddles on the stone pathway. A butler in a crisp uniform opened the heavy wooden door before he could knock. The man looked tired and stressed, as if he had not slept well in months. He introduced himself as Harrison and explained that he had worked for the Blackstone family for over 20 years. Harrison led Marcus through rooms filled with expensive furniture and paintings that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. The inside of the house was even more impressive than the outside. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Marble floors reflected the soft light from tall windows. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases on every table. Everything looked perfect and untouched, as if no one actually lived there. But Marcus noticed small signs of trouble. A broken vase had been swept into a corner. Scuff marks on the wall suggested furniture had been moved or thrown. The expensive-looking mirror had a crack running down one side. Harrison walked quickly through the halls and spoke in hushed tones about the family. Mrs. Blackstone had died in a car accident 5 years ago. Since then, Elena had become impossible to control. Her father tried everything from therapy to boarding schools to sending her to live with relatives in Europe. Nothing worked. She always found a way to cause trouble, no matter where she went or who was watching her. They reached Mr. Blackstone's office on the 2nd floor. The room was dark wood and leather, with shelves full of thick books. Mr. Blackstone sat behind a massive desk, looking older than his 50 years. His hair was gray at the temples, and worry lines creased his face. He stood up when Marcus entered and shook his hand firmly. His grip was strong, but his eyes looked defeated. Mr. Blackstone explained the rules clearly. Marcus would live in a guest room near Elena's suite. He would accompany her everywhere she went. He had permission to use whatever methods necessary to keep her safe and out of trouble. The family lawyer had already prepared documents giving Marcus limited authority to make decisions about Elena's activities when her father was away on business trips. As they spoke, Marcus heard loud music coming from somewhere upstairs. Then came the sound of something heavy hitting the floor, followed by female laughter and cursing. Mr. Blackstone closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. He looked at Marcus with an expression that mixed hope and despair. That was Elena making her presence known even though it was only 10 in the morning. Marcus realized this job would be unlike anything he had faced before. The challenge was not just protecting someone from outside threats, but protecting them from themselves. As thunder rolled across the sky outside, Marcus wondered if he had made a mistake taking this assignment. Marcus followed Harrison up the grand staircase toward the source of the loud music and crashing sounds. The butler moved carefully as if he was walking through a war zone. The music got louder with each step they climbed. It was some kind of heavy rock music with angry lyrics and pounding drums that seemed to shake the expensive paintings on the walls. Harrison knocked gently on a door at the end of the hallway, but there was no response over the noise. He opened the door slowly, and Marcus got his first look at Alina Blackstone. She was standing in the middle of what used to be an elegant bedroom, but now looked like a hurricane had blown through it. Clothes were scattered everywhere. Empty bottles and glasses covered every surface. The expensive furniture had been pushed around and some pieces were overturned. Alina herself was wearing torn jeans and a black tank top. Her long dark hair was messy, and her makeup was smeared as if she had been crying or fighting. But it was her eyes that caught Marcus' attention immediately. They were bright green and full of anger and defiance. When she saw Harrison and the stranger in her doorway, she turned the music up even louder and glared at them with pure hatred. She was beautiful in a dangerous way, like a wild animal that might attack at any moment. Marcus could see why so many guards had quit. This was not just a spoiled rich girl. This was someone who seemed determined to destroy everything around her, including herself. Alina grabbed an empty wine bottle and threw it against the wall near where Marcus was standing. The glass shattered and pieces scattered across the marble floor. She screamed something at them, but the music was too loud to understand her words. Harrison looked terrified and started backing toward the door, but Marcus stepped forward instead. He walked calmly to the expensive stereo system and unplugged it from the wall. The sudden silence felt shocking after the pounding music. Alina stared at him with surprise and rage. Nobody had ever simply turned off her music before. Most people either ran away or tried to reason with her or threatened to call her father. But Marcus just stood there looking at her with calm professional eyes, as if he was studying a problem he needed to solve. His silence seemed to make her even angrier. She started yelling at him, calling him names and demanding to know who he was and what he was doing in her room. Marcus let her scream for a full minute without saying a word. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, he introduced himself in a quiet, steady voice. He explained that he was her new security guard and that he would be staying at the house to make sure she stayed safe. Alina laughed, but it was not a happy sound. She told him that he would not last a week just like all the others. She promised to make his life so miserable that he would beg her father to let him quit. She had perfected the art of breaking security guards, and she was confident that Marcus would be no different. She picked up another bottle and threatened to throw it at him if he did not leave her room immediately. Marcus did not move or change his expression. He simply told her that throwing things would not make him leave, and that he had dealt with much worse situations than an angry young woman having a tantrum. His calm response seemed to frustrate Alina even more. She was used to getting dramatic reactions from people. Fear, anger, or attempts to control her were what she expected. But Marcus treated her outburst like it was simply weather that he had to wait out. For the next hour, Alina tested every boundary she could think of. She cursed at him. She threatened him. She tried to leave the room, but Marcus blocked her path without being rough or aggressive. Finally, exhausted from her efforts, she collapsed on her bed and glared at him with those dangerous green eyes. Marcus realized this was just the beginning of a very long and difficult assignment. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus arrived at the Blackstone estate, and every day had been a battle of wills between him and Alina. She woke up each morning with new plans to test his patience and push his limits. She would sneak out of her room at midnight hoping to slip past him, but Marcus was always waiting in the hallway. She tried climbing out of windows, but he caught her before she could reach the ground. She invited wild friends over for parties, but Marcus politely asked them to leave, and they always did when they saw his serious expression. Alina had never met anyone like Marcus before. Previous guards had either been too scared to stand up to her or too aggressive, and tried to physically force her to obey. Marcus was different. He never raised his voice or lost his temper. He never grabbed her or pushed her around. But he also never backed down or gave in to her demands. It was like trying to break a stone wall with her bare hands. The more she pushed, the stronger he seemed to become. On this particular Thursday evening, Alina had reached her breaking point. Her friend Jessica had called about a party at an underground club called the Basement. It was the kind of place where rich kids went to feel dangerous and rebellious. The club was known for having drugs easily available and fights that often sent people to the hospital. Elena knew her father would never allow her to go there, which made her want to go even more. She came downstairs wearing a short black dress and high heels that made her legs look endless. Her makeup was perfect and her hair was styled in loose waves that caught the light. She looked like a movie star getting ready for a premiere. Marcus was waiting by the front door as usual, reading a book and looking completely relaxed. When he saw her outfit, he knew exactly what she was planning. Elena announced that she was going out to meet friends and that Marcus could either drive her or she would call a taxi. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were challenging him to try to stop her. Marcus closed his book and stood up slowly. He told her calmly that she could not go to the basement because her father had specifically forbidden that club. Elena felt her temper starting to rise. She hated being told what she could and could not do, especially by someone who worked for her family. She started arguing with Marcus, telling him that she was an adult and could go wherever she wanted. She reminded him that he was just an employee and that she could have him fired with one phone call to her father. Marcus listened to her complaints without interrupting, but his answer remained the same. She was not going to the basement tonight, or any other night. His calm refusal made Elena feel like screaming. The argument continued for 10 minutes, with Elena getting more and more frustrated. She tried everything she could think of to change his mind. She offered to take him with her to the club. She promised to be home by midnight. She even tried flirting with him, hoping her beauty would weaken his resolve. Nothing worked. Marcus stood in front of the door like a human wall that would not be moved. Finally, Elena lost all control. Years of getting her way through tantrums and manipulation had not prepared her for someone who simply would not be intimidated or charmed. In a moment of pure rage, she raised her hand and slapped Marcus hard across his face. The sound echoed through the marble hallway like a gunshot. Her palm stung from the impact, and she could see a red mark forming on his cheek. For several seconds, neither of them moved or spoke. Marcus had not expected her to actually hit him. Elena had not expected to feel so shocked by her own actions. Something had changed in that moment, and they both knew it. The silence after the slap seemed to last forever. Marcus stood perfectly still with his hand slowly rising to touch his burning cheek. Elena watched him with wide eyes, suddenly realizing what she had done. She had hit people before during her tantrums, but they were usually friends or servants who would just walk away or complain to her father. Marcus was different. There was something dangerous in his stillness that made her heart start beating faster. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was so quiet that Elena had to strain to hear him. He told her that she had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. His words were calm, but there was something cold and threatening underneath them that she had never heard before. Elena felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that Marcus was not just angry. He was something much more dangerous than angry. Instead of yelling at her or threatening to tell her father, Marcus did something completely unexpected. He pulled out his cell phone and made a call to someone Elena had never heard him mention. She could only hear his side of the conversation, but it was clear he was calling in some kind of favor. He spoke in short sentences using words that sounded almost military. He mentioned her name and address and said that he needed help with a situation that required special handling. Elena tried to listen more carefully, but Marcus walked to the other side of the hallway and lowered his voice even more. She caught words like assessment and intervention and immediate response, but could not understand what he was planning. When he finished the call, he looked at her with eyes that seemed to see right through her. He told her to go to her room and stay there until further notice. Something in his tone made her obey without argument for the first time since he had arrived. From her bedroom window, Elena watched the front entrance of the estate. Within an hour, 3 black cars pulled up the circular driveway. 6 men in expensive dark suits got out and walked toward the house with the confidence of people who were used to handling serious problems. They did not look like regular security guards or police officers. They moved like soldiers or government agents who had seen real danger and violence. Elena pressed her face against the glass, trying to get a better look at the men meeting with Marcus on the front steps. They spoke in hushed tones for several minutes while looking up at her window. One of them was taking notes in a small notebook. Another was taking pictures of the house and grounds with a professional camera. The third man seemed to be giving Marcus some kind of equipment that he slipped into his jacket pocket. After 30 minutes, the men got back in their cars and drove away. Marcus looked up at Elena's window, and she quickly stepped back from the glass. She realized that he had known she was watching the entire time. A few minutes later, she heard his footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping outside her door. He knocked once and told her they needed to talk. When Elena opened the door, Marcus looked different somehow. The patient professional guard who had been putting up with her behavior for 3 weeks was gone. In his place was someone harder and more serious who looked at her like she was a problem that needed to be solved quickly and efficiently. He told her that things were going to change, starting immediately. Marcus explained that her slap had shown him that she was more dangerous than he had originally thought, not just to herself but to other people around her. He had called in specialists who dealt with high-risk individuals who could not be controlled through normal methods. They had given him new tools and permissions to handle her case more aggressively if necessary. Elena tried to interrupt him with her usual threats about calling her father, but Marcus held up his hand for silence. He told her that her father had already been contacted and had given full approval for whatever methods Marcus thought were necessary to keep her safe and under control. The conversation had happened while she was watching from her window. For the first time in her life, Elena felt truly afraid. Not afraid of being grounded or having her allowance cut off, but afraid of real consequences that she could not charm or manipulate her way out of. Marcus was no longer just a guard she could torment until he quit. He had become something much more serious, and she was starting to understand that her games were over. The next morning, Elena woke up to find Marcus sitting in a chair by her bedroom door, reading a thick file folder. She had never seen him with paperwork before and wondered what he was studying so carefully. When she asked him about it, he closed the folder and looked at her with those serious dark eyes that had become even more intense since the slapping incident. Marcus told Elena that it was time she learned the truth about who he really was. He had not been completely honest with her or her father about his background when he took the job. The simple security guard story was only part of the truth. Before working private security, Marcus had spent 8 years in the military as a special investigator. His job had been to protect high-value targets who were under constant threat from enemies who wanted them dead. Elena listened with growing amazement as Marcus described his real career. He had guarded generals in war zones where snipers tried to kill them every day. He had protected government witnesses who testified against dangerous criminals. He had been responsible for keeping diplomats alive in countries where kidnapping and murder were common business practices. Compared to those assignments, protecting a spoiled rich girl had seemed like an easy vacation job. Marcus opened the folder he had been reading and showed Elena photographs and documents that made her stomach turn cold. These were case files from his military days. Pictures of bombing sites where people had died. Reports about assassination attempts that had been stopped just in time. Letters from families thanking him for keeping their loved ones alive when everyone else had given up hope. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Marcus told Elena that the men who had visited the night before were not just security consultants. They were his former military colleagues who still worked in special operations. When Marcus called them after the slapping incident, he had not asked for advice. He had asked them to help him implement a program designed for people who could not be controlled through normal methods. Elena felt her hands starting to shake as Marcus explained what this meant. She was no longer just dealing with a patient security guard who would eventually quit like all the others. She was now the subject of a military-style intervention designed for high-risk individuals who posed a danger to themselves and others around them. The slap had not just made Marcus angry. It had convinced him that she needed the same kind of serious treatment that had been used on terrorists and enemy agents. Marcus showed Elena a new schedule that had been prepared for her. Every minute of her day would now be planned and monitored. She would have educational sessions about the consequences of reckless behavior. She would visit places where she could see firsthand what happened to people who made the kind of choices she had been making. She would meet with specialists who understood how to break down the walls that dangerous people built around themselves. The most frightening part was that Elena would have no choice in any of this. Her father had signed legal documents giving Marcus complete authority over her daily activities. If she tried to run away or fight the program, she would be taken to a secure facility where the treatment would continue under even more controlled conditions. Her days of wild parties and rebellious behavior were over whether she liked it or not. Elena tried to process everything Marcus was telling her. The man she had thought was just another guard to be manipulated and tormented was actually a trained professional who had dealt with much more dangerous people than her. The slap that had felt like a moment of victory had actually sealed her fate and put her under the control of someone who would not be impressed by her tears or threats. For the first time since her mother died, Elena felt completely powerless. Marcus was not someone she could charm with her beauty or break down with her tantrums. He was someone who had seen real evil and violence and would not be moved by the games of a rich girl who thought she was untouchable. Her new reality was beginning to sink in, and it terrified her more than anything ever had before. 3 days after revealing his true identity, Marcus told Elena to get dressed for a trip into the city. She had been expecting him to keep her locked in the house as punishment, but instead he was taking her somewhere. Elena put on designer clothes and expensive jewelry, thinking they might be going shopping or to lunch at a fancy restaurant. She was wrong. Their first stop was a rundown building in the poorest part of the city where a sign read Riverside Rehabilitation Center. Elena had never been to this neighborhood before and felt uncomfortable as Marcus parked the car between rusted vehicles and broken glass. The building looked nothing like the expensive private clinics her wealthy friends went to when they needed help with their problems. Inside the center, Elena met young people who were not much older than herself, but looked like they had lived through war. A girl named Sarah, who was 23, looked 40 because of what drugs had done to her face and body. She told Elena about losing her teeth, her job, and her family because of her addiction to pills that started as prescription medicine for a back injury. Marcus made Elena sit and listen to story after story from people whose lives had been destroyed by the same kind of reckless behavior Elena thought was fun and harmless. A young man named David described how he had killed a family of 4 while driving drunk after a party similar to the ones Elena attended every weekend. He would spend the rest of his life in prison and wake up every morning knowing that 4 innocent people were dead because of his choices. Elena tried to tune out the horrible stories, but Marcus would not let her look away or check her phone. He made her ask questions and really listen to the answers. When she complained that these people were different from her because they came from poor families, Marcus introduced her to residents who had grown up with money and privilege just like her. Jennifer had been a rich girl from a good family who thought she was too smart and too wealthy to ever have serious problems. She started using cocaine at parties because it made her feel confident and glamorous. Within 2 years, she had lost everything, including her trust fund, her family relationships, and her health. Now she lived in a halfway house and worked minimum wage jobs trying to rebuild a life that drugs had completely destroyed. The most shocking visit was to the county morgue where Marcus had arranged for Elena to see what happened to people who made the ultimate bad choice. The medical examiner showed her bodies of young people who had died from overdoses, car accidents, and violence related to drug dealing. Elena had to run to the bathroom to throw up after seeing a girl her own age who had died at a party when someone gave her pills mixed with deadly chemicals. On the drive home, Elena sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything she had seen and heard. Marcus did not lecture her or ask how she felt about the experience. He simply drove through the city, pointing out places where violence and tragedy happened every day because people made choices without thinking about consequences. When they reached the estate, Elena went straight to her room and lay on her bed staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, she was not planning her next rebellion or thinking about ways to annoy her father or the staff. Instead, she was remembering the faces of the people she had met and the stories they had told her. Marcus knocked on her door that evening and asked if she wanted to talk about what she had experienced. Elena found herself asking questions she had never thought about before. Why did some people survive their mistakes, while others died from them? How could smart people from good families end up destroying their lives? What was the difference between having fun and being dangerously reckless? Marcus answered her questions honestly without trying to scare her more than she already was. He explained that the difference between Elena and the people they had met was often just luck and timing. She had been protected by her father, money, and good medical care when she made dangerous choices, but that protection would not last forever, and eventually her luck would run out if she continued down the same path. For the first time since her mother died, Elena felt like someone was talking to her like an intelligent adult, instead of just trying to control her behavior or give up on her completely. Marcus was showing her real consequences instead of just threatening punishments that never seemed to matter. She was beginning to understand that her actions affected more than just herself. Over the following weeks, something surprising began to happen between Marcus and Elena. The hostile tension that had defined their relationship started to change into something neither of them had expected. Elena found herself looking forward to their daily conversations about the places they had visited and the people they had met. Marcus discovered that when Elena was not being defensive and rebellious, she was actually intelligent and thoughtful. Elena started asking Marcus about his military experiences and the dangerous situations he had faced while protecting other people. She was fascinated by stories of his work in foreign countries where he had to think quickly and make life or death decisions. Marcus found himself sharing memories he had never talked about with anyone, including the time he had saved a young diplomat from kidnappers who wanted to kill her for political reasons. As they spent more time together, Marcus began to understand why Elena had been acting out so destructively. After her mother's death in the car accident, Elena felt abandoned by everyone who was supposed to care about her. Her father buried himself in work to deal with his grief and left Elena to be raised by servants and teachers who were paid to watch her, but did not really know her as a person. Elena admitted that she had been testing everyone around her to see if anyone would care enough to stick around when things got difficult. Every guard, boyfriend, teacher, and therapist had eventually given up on her or been fired by her father when her behavior became too much trouble. She had started to believe that no one would ever really fight for her or refuse to abandon her when she needed them most. Marcus realized that his military training had taught him to see people as either threats that needed to be neutralized or assets that needed to be protected. But Elena was neither of those things. She was simply a lost young woman who had been using anger and rebellion to hide her fear of being alone and unwanted. Her dangerous behavior was not really about parties and excitement. It was about trying to feel something other than the emptiness that had been growing inside her since her mother died. Elena began to understand that Marcus' strict rules and protective behavior were not about controlling her freedom. They were about someone finally caring enough to keep her alive and safe, even when she was trying to destroy herself. No one had ever been willing to stand up to her consistently without either giving up or becoming cruel and aggressive in return. They started working together to find better ways for Elena to channel her energy and need for independence. Marcus helped her research volunteer opportunities at local charities, where she could use her education and resources to help other people instead of just causing problems. Elena discovered that she was good at organizing events and raising money for causes she cared about. The first project Elena chose was helping to fund a new wing at the rehabilitation center where they had met Sarah and the other recovering addicts. Elena used her social connections to plan a charity dinner where wealthy families could donate money while feeling good about helping less fortunate people. She was surprised by how much satisfaction she got from seeing her efforts make a real difference in other people's lives. Marcus watched Elena transform from an angry, self-destructive girl into someone who was finding purpose and meaning in her life. He had protected many people during his career, but he had never seen someone change so completely once they understood that someone genuinely cared about their well-being. Elena was becoming the kind of person her mother would have been proud of. Elena noticed that Marcus was also changing through their work together. The cold professional distance he maintained with everyone was softening into something warmer and more human. She learned that Marcus had originally gone into military protection work because he wanted to save people, but years of violence and constant danger had made him forget why helping others had mattered to him in the first place. Their relationship was becoming something neither of them had planned or expected. Elena was learning to trust someone who would not abandon her when she made mistakes. Marcus was remembering what it felt like to help someone grow and heal instead of just preventing them from being hurt. They were becoming allies in helping Elena build a life worth living instead of just surviving from one crisis to the next. The positive changes in Elena did not go unnoticed by her father, who could hardly believe the transformation in his daughter. For the first time in years, Elena was coming home at reasonable hours, talking about meaningful projects and treating the household staff with respect. Mr. Blackstone was so impressed that he increased Marcus' salary and gave Elena access to more money for her charity work. However, their progress was threatened when Elena's old friends began pressuring her to return to her previous lifestyle. They called and texted constantly, telling her that she had become boring and that Marcus had brainwashed her into being a different person. Elena tried to explain that she was happier now and doing things that mattered, but her former party friends could not understand why anyone would choose volunteer work over wild nights and expensive entertainment. The situation came to a crisis point on a Friday evening when Elena's ex-boyfriend Jake Morrison showed up at the estate without warning. Jake was the kind of dangerous, attractive man that Elena used to find exciting. He came from old money, but had been kicked out of 3 private schools for fighting and drug dealing. His family wealth protected him from serious legal consequences, but everyone who knew him understood that he was headed for real trouble. Jake arrived at the front door carrying a bottle of expensive champagne and a small bag that Marcus immediately recognized as containing illegal drugs. He demanded to see Elena, claiming that he missed her and wanted to take her out for a night like old times. Jake was clearly under the influence of something that made his eyes bright and his movements too quick and aggressive. Marcus calmly told Jake that Elena was not available and suggested that he leave the property immediately. Jake laughed and said that no hired security guard was going to keep him away from his girlfriend. He pushed past Marcus and started calling Elena's name while walking through the house. Marcus followed closely behind him, ready to intervene if Jake became more violent or tried to go upstairs to Elena's room. Elena heard the commotion and came downstairs to see what was happening. When she saw Jake, she felt a mixture of old attraction and new understanding about how dangerous he really was. Jake looked worse than she remembered, with bloodshot eyes and the kind of nervous energy that came from using stimulant drugs. He grabbed her hands and tried to pull her toward the door, telling her about a party where all their old friends were waiting. For a moment, Elena felt tempted to go with him. It would be so easy to fall back into her old life, where she did not have to think about consequences or responsibility. But then she looked at Marcus standing quietly nearby and remembered everything she had learned about where that path led. She told Jake gently but firmly that she could not go with him and that he should leave. Jake's reaction was immediate and violent. He grabbed Elena by the wrists hard enough to leave bruises and accused her of thinking she was better than him now that she had become a boring charity girl. When Marcus stepped forward to intervene, Jake pulled out a switchblade knife and warned him to stay back. The situation had escalated from annoying to genuinely dangerous in seconds. Marcus moved faster than Elena had ever seen anyone move. Within moments, he had disarmed Jake and pinned him face down on the marble floor. Jake struggled and screamed threats, but Marcus held him easily while Elena called the police. When the officers arrived, they found drugs in Jake's possession and arrested him for assault with a deadly weapon and illegal substance possession. After Jake was taken away, Elena sat on the front steps, shaking from fear and adrenaline. She realized how close she had come to being seriously hurt or killed by someone she used to trust. Marcus sat beside her and explained that Jake's behavior was typical of people whose drug use had progressed to the point where they became unpredictable and violent. Elena understood that if Marcus had not been there, Jake might have forced her to leave with him, and she could have ended up as another tragic story like the one she had heard at the rehabilitation center. The experience made her realize how different her life had become and how much she valued the safety and stability that Marcus provided. That night, Elena could not sleep because she kept thinking about how easily she could have made the wrong choice and gone with Jake. She was grateful to Marcus not just for protecting her physically, but for helping her become someone who could recognize danger and make better decisions when faced with temptation. 6 months had passed since the slap that changed everything between Marcus and Elena. The hostile relationship that had begun with thrown bottles and angry threats had transformed into something neither of them could have imagined. Elena had become a completely different person who used her energy and resources to help others instead of destroying everything around her. Marcus had remembered why he had originally wanted to protect people and help them build better lives. Elena was now the head organizer for 3 different charity organizations in the city. She had raised over $200,000 for the rehabilitation center and had personally helped 12 young people get into treatment programs. Her story of transformation had been featured in local newspapers, and she had started speaking at high schools about the dangers of reckless living and the importance of making responsible choices. The girl who used to wake up planning new ways to cause trouble now woke up excited about meetings with city officials about opening a new youth center. Elena had discovered that she was naturally good at leadership and organization when she used those skills for positive purposes. She felt proud of herself for the first time since her mother had died, and that pride motivated her to work even harder. Marcus had also been changed by their experience together. Working with Elena had reminded him that his real calling was not just preventing bad things from happening, but helping people discover their potential for good. He had decided to leave private security work and start his own consulting business that specialized in helping troubled young people from wealthy families who needed more than traditional therapy or punishment. Elena's father was so impressed with the transformation in his daughter and the work Marcus had done that he offered to provide the funding for Marcus' new business venture. Mr. Blackstone had watched his daughter change from someone he barely recognized into a young woman who reminded him of his deceased wife. He wanted to make sure other families could have access to the same kind of help that had saved Elena's life. The new business would be called Second Chance Security, and it would focus on helping young people who were heading down dangerous paths before they reached the point where traditional interventions were no longer effective. Marcus would use his military training and experience with high-risk individuals to create programs that showed real consequences while still providing hope for positive change. Elena would work with Marcus as a peer counselor who could relate to the young people they were trying to help. Her story of transformation would be powerful evidence that change was possible even for someone who seemed completely out of control. Together, they would visit schools, detention centers, and treatment facilities to reach young people who were making the same mistakes Elena had made. On the 6-month anniversary of their first meeting, Marcus and Elena stood in the same hallway where she had slapped him. Both of them remembered that moment clearly, but now they understood it differently. The slap had been the turning point that forced both of them to stop pretending and start dealing with the real issues underneath their surface conflict. Elena apologized again for hitting him even though she had done so many times before. Marcus told her that the slap had been the best thing that could have happened because it had forced him to see her as someone who needed real help instead of just someone who needed to be controlled. Without that moment of violence, they might never have moved past their initial hostility to discover the potential for growth and healing. Their relationship had evolved from guard and prisoner to teacher and student to partners working toward common goals. Elena had learned that having someone who truly cared about her well-being was more valuable than having the freedom to make dangerous choices. Marcus had learned that helping someone transform their life was more rewarding than simply preventing them from getting hurt. As they prepared for their first official case with Second Chance Security, Elena felt nervous, but excited about using her experience to help another young person who was struggling with the same issues she had faced. Marcus felt confident that their combined backgrounds would make them effective at reaching people who had been written off by everyone else. They both understood that their work would be difficult and that not every case would have a happy ending like theirs had. But they also knew that they had discovered something valuable in their relationship that was worth sharing with others who needed hope that change was possible. Their partnership had begun with conflict and violence, but had grown into something that could make a real difference in the world.